Welcome, Wargamers, to the putrid gardens in the realm of chaos, because today we are talking about the Nurgle Daemons, those entities that tear into reality from the Garden of Nurgle to defile, corrupt, and annihilate any kind of hope. Now, one thing I'd like to add right up top, if you are new to the channel or just this video, please consider clicking the subscribe button. We have a whole bunch of great videos here concerning Age of Sigmar lore and various other games, including Conquest and Infinity here and there, that kind of stuff, with a really awesome community in the comments. And so if you'd like to be a part of that, please hit subscribe so that you get notified about future videos, and it goes a long way to helping me with like metrics and YouTube and all that kind of jazz on the outside. Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar or the faction Maggotkin of Nurgle, today we're really focusing on the demon aspect of it. It's kind of one of the whole groups of models within this book. Demons are an interesting thing in the Games Workshop intellectual property, because essentially they are each a bit of the Chaos Gods, Nurgle, Khorne, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, and the Great Horn Rat for that matter. Essentially those characters are so massive in power and stature that they can break off small bits of themselves and craft it into an entity all its own. And that's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about today. When you go to play the Maggotkin of Nurgle book, there are forces that are marked as mortal, meaning they are humans that were changed, and then there's demonic. So we're going to have forces straight out of hell, but they fully represent all the things that their patron god, in this case Nurgle, is. And so the way we're going to structure this is basically talking about demons in general, how they function in this kind of setting, and what Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and thereby extension to a lesser extent 40k, demons are like. And then we'll move on to more talking about the specific Nurgle-centric ones. So, Nurgle himself has broken off an infinitely small piece of his own nature. This is known as a demon. He is a direct representative and warrior of his patron god, a copy of at least their nature. Certainly not their size or their strength, nothing like that. No one's as big as Nurgle. He's not, self-dividing like a cell or anything like that. But it's important to know that they are a piece of their deity simply because demons can't change sides, but they do not have autonomy in the same way that you or I do. They're literally a piece of a larger entity, and this allows Chaos Gods to spread their influence far and wide. Within the realm of chaos, there are vast armies of demons in constant warfare as the borders between the gods ebb and flow. Let's say, for example, Khorne becomes ascendant, right? He becomes kind of the most powerful character amongst the Chaos Gods in this great game that they play. Well, that influx of energy into him will allow him to create more demons, and so he will then have more forces to push the borders of his brothers back. When Khorne goes down in stock and Nurgle rises, again, we're talking about him today, more plague bearers and all these gross, nasty things, the borders of the Garden of Nurgle expand, and all of a sudden these demons are sweeping over their neighbors. But they can also act as the gods' foot soldiers in the material world. But getting them there is a bit of a hassle. You see, demons within the realm of chaos make perfect sense, but they are incredibly unnatural in the mortal realms. They simply don't belong there. However, if enough destruction or chaos is done in a tight enough area, a veil can be torn between the two worlds, and demons will begin to spill out. The smaller the demon, the easier it is for them to get through. The larger ones are going to require more ritual, more sacrifice, more desecration, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, on the far end, there's a point where stuff just cannot come through. Like, for example, Nurgle himself, no matter how big a terror is, can't just walk into the mortal realms because he's just too big. He's too much immaterial to be able to fit into reality. When demons are struck down in the mortal realms, instead of leaving a corpse, they dissipate and go back to the realm of chaos, ready to be reformed once more by their masters. But that's demons like in general, right? Let's talk about Nurgle demons. Nurgle, as we've explored this week, is the god of disease and entropy and despair, and we looked at his mortal followers already. Oftentimes, the goals of those mortal followers is, honestly, to tear open rents in reality so that the Garden of Nurgle and his demons can pour into the mortal realms. This typically starts with the lowly plague bearer. And there's a whole bunch of units that are kind of like on the same peg of the totem pole, if you will, in terms of they're just kind of nobodies, so bear with me. It's not like the Plague Bearer is the actual bottom. But a Plague Bearer is a largely mindless humanoid, terribly deformed by disease and pustules, that just kind of saunter around the Garden of Nurgle. These are people, like basically their souls, who have died from the disease known as Nurgle's rot and are damned to an eternity of servitude sustained only by the will of Nurgle himself. They are demons, but basically imagine if you put the soul of someone in there just as a constant torture. Now, of course, this service can be done on foot with huge hordes of slow, droning, plague bearers, and they really do move like zombies. They're described pretty frequently, like especially in the early Realmgate War books, of they just move super slow, but they don't stop coming, and they're very hard to take out. And they can do that on foot, or they can do it on the top of a Rotfly, which is when you get the Plague Bearer Cavalry unit. Now, it's important to note that the lesser the demon, meaning the lower you are on the rung, the lower your intelligence and individuality. So Plague Bearers have no autonomy. They can't really think a whole lot for themselves, and they kind of act like stereotypical 80s movie zombies, just totally mindless. Right next to them, or I should say skittering between their feet, are Nurglings, and they're not so much individual entities as they are these little sprites, almost like little goblins that just kind of come up and annoy and entertain and get into all kinds of mischief. They are a reflection of the dark humor that Nurgle exudes, and again, almost no autonomy. They don't really think. They're almost like toddlers who are just demon infused. And another one on the kind of lower intelligence rung is the Beasts of Nurgle. And these guys are the best. These are the goodest boys in all of the mortal realms. Because if you look at them, they present as these gross, large slug monsters. I've got all kinds of spores and tentacles all over them. They're dripping with nasty decay and ooze. But they have the minds of excited puppy dogs. And I mean actual puppy dog. They just are really happy to get in and play with people. They want to roll around and have fun and wrestle and all the things that dogs like to do. They charge at the enemy not to destroy, but to play. And I kind of view them as being off to the side of a hierarchy because they're not really designed to have a mind or a personality. They really are meant to be like animals, at least a corrupt form of it. But at this point, we could start talking about demons with brains, right? Everything from here on out is at least smart enough to be given a task and execute it independently. And that all starts with the Heralds of Nurgle. Think of these as plague bearers that have been elevated, imbued with more power and personality to be able to direct their lesser kin. And these come in 3 varieties. The Poxbringer, which is essentially a plague bearer that went Super Saiyan, and now he is also a wizard. So these are going to be your more intelligent, more arcane kind of minded types. There's the Sloppity Bile Piper, which the Sloppity Bile Piper is actually a very cursed being. It's a plague bearer that received a curse where it starts to dance and laugh and have fun. He rips out the stomach of the last Sloppity Bile Piper, the one who passed the curse to him, and he is it's like a disease for Nurgle units specifically plague bearers actually. And he just kind of gets this jaunty dance and he starts entertaining, and he just goes until he dies, in which case the nearest plague bearer picks up his guts, turns it into a bagpipe, and starts playing and doing the exact same thing. So he's kind of like a leader, he's like a rallying point, entertainer, all these kinds of things. And the last one is the Spoilpox Scrivener. And so one of the things that's not really touched on too much in the kind of intro lore is that not only does Nurgle like to create diseases, but he likes to record them as well. Things naturally evolve and interact in the wildlife, and so essentially he has the Spoilpox Scriveners going out with huge hordes of plague bearers to count all the various diseases of the realms, and he is the accountant, and I guess you could say, in that respect. Now, the named characters, I think, really deserve their own dedicated video, so I'm going to go ahead and really focus on those elsewhere, but the last big guy we have to mention are the Great Unclean Ones, and I love the Great Unclean Ones so much. Not so much because of the literal model. I mean, I do like the model, to be honest with you. It's pretty impressive. But the reason I find Great Unclean Ones to be so interesting is the way that they're described. We actually know a lot about them simply from the Realmgate Wars, where that initial story setting in Age of Sigmar, that first year it was out, it was kind of the campaign arc for that time. And we saw a particular Great Unclean One named Bolithrax, who was constantly fighting Gardas Steelsoul, a Lord Celestin of the Hallowed Knights. And the way that those books were written, those very, very early ones, was so interesting because it wasn't so much talking about the sheer size, which of course, if you look at a Great Unclean One, it's the most obvious thing that you see, but how they move, that they're too fast for their size. Like, even just their motions seem unnatural, given the physics of the universe. Whenever they are in a scene, they dominate it. I mean, just like their force of personality, the tone, the way that they speak to one another, it's just scene stealing in the best way possible. They are the scariest of demons, and they come in all kinds of sizes and shapes as well. Of course, we know that they're all pretty big. I mean, Bolithrax was so fat that he ran through a realm gate and broke it. But on the other end of that spectrum, let's consider him we're going to call him a tiny guy. He's the tater tot. We're going to talk about the actual big one, which, if you haven't read the Realmgate Wars, this is just going to sound out of left field and completely random. But there was a Great Unclean One that was so huge that his whole job was to just go sit in a river in Garan and poop. That's all he did. That was his full-time job. Sit here, crap in the river. And he did. And so he would contaminate everything going downstream from it. But to give you a sense of scale, that's how large this thing was, where it's just like sit in a river, just poop. Boom, you're contributing to the war effort. What a champion. And so I wanted to end this video like I end all of mine by talking about why I like this so much. And, Demons can be a tough one for me personally because they are intentionally, I will say, rather one-dimensional, right? That dimension is whatever their god is like. Nurgle likes diseases and despairs. Take a wild guess as to what these guys are super into. But that being said, that's the point, and that's kind of to me is where it gets a pass for being not really boring, but that's the only word that comes to mind, because it is a copy paste of a singular will. And while that can make them a bit boring narratively, it also makes them terrifying. And keep in mind, when I say they're boring or mindless, I'm only talking about the lowest tier, right? Like Heralds of Nurgle and up show an immense amount of personality. One of the best books to get that sense if you're interested is actually Nagash Undying King. There's a whole force of Blight Kings, but then there's also a Herald of Nurgle joining them, and you see an immense amount of personality from that character. I won't say any more to spoil it for you. I really enjoyed that book. As always, Great Unclean Ones, as I said before, are always scene stealers, and there have been a bunch of really cool Herald-level characters as well. Some focus on Nurgle's, perversion of joy, so they seem kind of giddy and frantic and playful, and others can reflect his dour hopelessness and seem kind of grim and, I guess, sort of what you might expect from a god of despair. Some have these colossal war plans. Some just want to be gardeners and get left alone, like Horticulus Slimex. He's a named character. He's going to have his own video, but he's just kind of cranky and he just wants to keep planting seeds and have a garden. So I guess what I'm really trying to get at is that even though on the surface, talking about demons can make them seem one-dimensional, when you get into the leadership, character abounds for these guys, and it makes them insanely interesting. So friends, tell me, what is your favorite Demon of Nurgle? I would love to know. For me, it's my boy Bolithrax, the one who was initially fighting Gardas Steelsoul, chased him all through the Garden of Nurgle in the Realmgate Wars. It was just a terror, and I absolutely loved that story. Let me know in the comments down below which is your favorite, and I will respond to you there. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming!